I wrote this book because I believe that if we talk together, if we work together, if we talk about how these things are impacting us, and we show up wanting to make change, that we will find opportunities. I became incredibly observant about how race works. I think that you have to be observant when you are one of the only people of color around in order to pick up what isn't being said. And so I had spent my life doing that. I had spent my life trying to figure out why I was being treated differently, or what I needed to do to make people feel comfortable around me, how I could fit in or get ahead in a world that didn't quite seem to be designed for me. I had built a fledgling and then somewhat successful career in tech, like many people in Seattle. And I really thought that, I was on my way to really accomplishing something great, even just being a Black woman who could have some sort of financial security in a country where that really was rare and hard to come by. But then Trayvon Martin was murdered. And in his death, I was really thrown into chaos and grief for him, for his family, for everyone who has been lost, for the fear that I've had to live with, that my sons would have to live with, that my brother has had to live with. And what I noticed when I looked around at my peers, my mostly white peers, that same fear and anguish wasn't there. And so I started trying to find a way to connect with people, to let them know why this was impacting me, why these issues had always impacted me and my family and other people like me. And so I had no idea I was actually going to be a writer. It's not what I set out to be. I really set out just to communicate with my peers. I had loved writing as a child, but I had really set it aside. As someone who grew up in poverty, my goal was primarily just to make sure that as I grew, I would be able to support my family. And there weren't a lot of examples ahead of me of contemporaries, Black contemporaries, who were making successful livings, especially in the Seattle area, writing. So I let that dream go and focused on earning a secure income. But I started writing because I needed to be seen and heard. I needed to know that this really was my community. I needed to know that what was happening to me, wasn't just happening to me, that people saw me and cared. So I started writing first on Facebook. I started writing kind of on my blogs. I had a blog that was just dedicated to food, by the way, and just pro tip, if you like food and you want free food, start a food blog. Nobody has to read it. People will just give you food. And that's really why I was in it. I was traveling a lot for work, eating things, taking pictures of it. This was kind of, I think, I started it before Facebook was huge, worth taking pictures of everything, and I didn't have an Instagram. Anyways, I digress. I stopped writing about food and started talking about race. I started talking about what I was experiencing. And a couple of things happened. One, I lost most of my friends. Most of the people who had kind of, I guess, thought we had agreed that we weren't going to talk about race, that we were going to leave that out of our friendship, were kind of offended that I would dare bring this part of myself in front of them. And so I lost a lot of my friends, a lot of my professional relationships, and they were quickly replaced by other people of color, especially other Black people within the Seattle area, who were feeling the same way I did. And then by people across the country. And then people of all races and ethnicities reaching out, really connecting with the way in which I was writing about these issues. And so I was still working in tech most of the time, and I was kind of like writing at night, writing in the weekends. And my writing started to take off a little bit. And I started getting calls to do interviews about what I was writing about. And I remember going on my lunch break and hiding in my car to talk about race with New York publishers. And then I realized I couldn't live this split reality. I couldn't have part of myself be a whole human who could talk about issues impacting their life, and then work me that never talked about anything, even when racist things were happening to me at work. And so I took a leap and I quit my job and kind of dedicated myself to writing full time. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just worked and worked really, really hard. And eventually I was presented with the opportunity to write a book. And I was asked if I felt like writing a book on talking about race. And I said no. And if you read the beginning of my book, you'll see that conversation in there, that I was not incredibly excited about it. But when I did decide to finally write it, when I finally gave it some thought and realized that this was necessary, that maybe some things shouldn't only exist online, some things we should hold in our hands, some discussions are that important, I wrote the book. And when I wrote this book, I wrote it hoping that people would be able to get past step one of their conversations. I wrote it from a place of frustration, where people seemed to be talking past each other, getting into furious arguments when they were talking about completely different things. I really wanted people to get past that and get to the meat of the problem and start working towards solutions. Because the truth is that systemic racism is killing people, and we really don't have time to mess around. So I wanted to take chapter by chapter the questions that I'd been asked, the questions I hoped that people would ask, and answer them and give people tools that they could take with them to move past those initial hangups and really get towards identifying real problems and working towards solutions. This was a book that I imagined being used in classrooms, being used in workplaces, being used in families, where you would say, oh, this problem kind of reminds me of this chapter. Let me go back through it again and see if maybe we can get a little further in this conversation. I wanted it to be something that took high-level race theory and brought it to your day-to-day life and said, this is how these important concepts are impacting you in work, at home, at school. And this is what we need to pay attention to and talk through in order to find some solutions. So that was my goal with the book. And when it was published in January of 2018, it was kind of a slow moving debut. You know, not many people knew who I was, but the book did pretty well. And, you know, it hit the very bottom of the bestseller list for 1 week. And then it just kept selling, just not a ton, just people referring it over and over and over again. People kept talking about it and using it. And then the paperback came out, people used it some more, but I really had thought, okay, this book has somewhat run its course as far as the hype around it, and had started focusing on it, had long been writing my next book. In no way did I imagine that in 2020, my book would be back at the top of the bestseller list, being utilized all over again in numbers I had, never ever dreamed of. I never imagined that in a time of crisis such as this, that my book would be what people would turn to. And I can say that when this first started, in May, after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, when all of a sudden my book shot to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, I was very upset. And I think that some people will immediately understand why, and some won't. But when you write a book that you're hoping people will do the day-to-day work with, when you're writing a book that you're hoping might improve work relations or improve, conversations we have about government and systems, and to find that it is suddenly picked up after the brutal murder of one of your kin, it is bittersweet to say the least. And it was very difficult for me to feel anything positive about it. It was really traumatic because I am first and foremost a Black woman, and I was grieving, grieving this brutality, this murder, fearful for all of the protesters putting their health and lives on the line to protest once again for Black lives. I was heartbroken. And to find that that's what it took for people to engage en masse with my work and the work of so many other Black writers was really a gut punch. But then I had to realize that people were still fighting, that there was no time for me, for my bitterness, when people were out protesting and risking their health and their lives for Black lives, then I needed to continue to work and embrace this moment. And we are in a unique moment. Right now, I like to think of this is probably the closest that white America has gotten to feel about what it might be like to be a Black person in this country in my lifetime. We have a pandemic that has eroded any trust that we have in our systems, in our government, has shown how little everyone matters to the powers that be. We have threats around every corner that are increasing our heart rate, that are keeping us tense. We're at financial risk. Everyone is strained. No one can escape the brutal realities of this pandemic. And in the midst of this, to then find that police will still risk their own health to take the life of a Black man has really, I think, brought the reality of the everyday horrors of what it can mean to be Black in America to many people who have never experienced it. And it's not something we can turn away from. Our sports games aren't playing. We can't go out to the bars with friends. It is not something that people who do not have to live this reality can just turn off right now. And I think it has made it very clear how unbearable this reality is and how unbearable it always has been. The truth is that right now, Black people, Latinx people, Native people are facing not only state violence, not only state oppression, but a much higher risk of illness and death in this pandemic. We are facing an onslaught from all directions. We have to do something. Something must be done. And I said this in 2017, I said this in 2015, I said this in 2014, and I keep saying it, and other people who do this work keep saying it, because people are dying, and every person is worth fighting for and worth saving. So right now, a lot of people who are just now realizing that things are bad are trying to learn how bad and what can I do, and where's the best place to start? What's the history of this? And I think that that is why we are seeing such a huge surge in reading of books, many amazing classics as well, books that I myself have referenced in my work many times. And I think it is important that we recognize that right now in this moment, we have to both learn and do, and we have to do them at the same time. This is more than just a game of catch up. This is an emergency. And this means that while you are trying to understand the history of what is happening right now, while you are trying to fully see the scope of systemic racism and oppression in society, while you are trying to understand what your peers of color may have been going through, it is important that you also take direction from the people who are doing the work to undo this harm right now. It is important that you look to both learn and do, that you have conversations that are aimed in goals and finding action. It is not enough just to learn. It is not enough just to talk. And yes, I wrote a book that's called So You Want to Talk About Race, but my hope is that the talk would lead to action. And I hope that right now what you are looking for is not just how to understand, but how to do. And I hope that you will take some risks, take some leaps in defense of Black lives and the lives of other people of color. Because we cannot let this keep happening. We are people and we're dying. Our children, our elderly, we are being crushed by this system. And the truth is that there is a lot that we can do. I wrote this book because I believe that if we talk together, if we work together, if we talk about how these things are impacting us, and we show up wanting to make change, that we will find opportunities, that each community, each family, each workplace, each city can find action that can be taken. All of these systems were built by people. They were not built by gods. They were not built by anyone smarter or more special than us. And they have been maintained by people. They have been maintained by us. And we should be trying to find out how we interact with these harmful systems so that we can deconstruct them, so that we can be a part of the solution. And we have to. It's funny because when I give talks or when people reach out to me, a lot of times the initial things that people say to me are, you know, it's so bad, racism is so bad in this country. I wish there was something I could do. Or there's nothing I could do. It's never going to happen. Or how many of you have heard, we just have to wait till this generation dies out, as if there's an expiration date on systemic racism. And then when I start listing all of the things we can do, I get the opposite. Oh, that's too much. I could never possibly do that. I could never handle everything. There's no way I could do all the things we have to do. I'm not even going to start. But I want to reiterate, I started doing this work because I believe in Black lives, because I believe that every Black life matters. And this means that every effort I make that may save a Black life is worthwhile. And I do not believe I will see the end of white supremacy in my lifetime. I don't even think my children will. But I do believe that everything I can do that can give another Black person or another person of color a real chance, that can allow another person of color to live in safety, with dignity, is worthwhile. Because I believe I am precious. I believe that we are precious. I believe that we are wonderful, amazing human beings who should not have to be as gloriously resilient as we are. I believe that every human being deserves care and safety and to be treated with dignity. And I believe that every time that we can fight towards that, that every time we can dismantle a little piece of the system that is crushing people, that we are doing something amazing and worthwhile. And so I hope that in this discussion and our question and answer, that you start thinking about what you can do, that you take these little pieces, that you look at where you have power. And we all have a little bit of power, at least. And get excited about what you can do to make a difference. And I will say here that if you are a person of color who is watching and listening to me, I hope that you will take this time, you will take my message of our fundamental worth to heart. That you will understand that we are not just martyrs, we are not just struggle, we are not just sacrifice. That we deserve to not only survive, but to thrive, to live in joy. And that whatever we do to nurture that joy is part of the struggle, is an important, integral part of the struggle. We cannot survive if we do not protect and nurture and grow what is beautiful in our families, in our culture, in our histories, and in our future. And I hope that when our allies are busy dismantling the systems with which they have power, that we can get busy healing, loving, growing, protecting, and honoring each other. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up for question and answer.
Thank you, Ijeoma. What a privilege to hear from you and learn from you this evening. Now we have some time for questions. Remember, you can type questions by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen. While we may not have time for everyone's questions, we will try to get through as many as possible. Our first question comes from Keela Murdoch. She asks, could you share more about acting in Thin Skin? It is all super exciting.
Oh, yeah, so that is, okay, so people who don't know what Thin Skin is, it's a movie that I am in, that my brother wrote. So my brother is a local musician and storyteller here in Seattle, and he is married to Lindy West. Some of you may be familiar with her, the author, and he has had a long running show kind of highlighting a personal horrible time in his life when our father died suddenly while he was getting divorced, and then he had a horrible autoimmune disease that risked his life. He wrote a musical storytelling show that went to New York. It was really big. And this whole thing has been playing in different iterations for probably 10 years. And then he and Charles Mudede and Lindy started writing a screenplay about 10 years ago for this. And they decided to make a movie, and they roped me in to play a somewhat fictionalized version of myself, which was quite the experience because I had never acted before. And also because I was told at the beginning that it was going to be maybe 2 lines that I was going to act, and it ended up actually being like the second most lines in the film. It was a blast. It was wonderful. It was really hard. I've learned that acting life is not for me. Those are very long hours. I am used to writing and being like, okay, I'm going to stop writing right now and go get a snack. And you can't leave a film set and go get a snack whenever you want. I've learned that. But it was a beautiful experience. And the film had its debut at the Bentonville Film Festival last week, which sold out, which was weird because I didn't know you could sell out virtual film festivals, but apparently you can. And then it will be showing again at other festivals to be announced shortly. But it's weird to see yourself on a screen, especially when you never intended to be an actor. I thought for sure it was going to be an absolute disaster, but I'm actually really proud of it. And I love working with my family. So that was, a wonderful, I think, once in a lifetime experience for me. And I'm super proud of my brother.
That's great. So next question is, this is from Nadine Steckling. Being a person of color in Eastern Washington isn't easy. Reading your book gave me the words and tools and courage I needed to make sure my voice is heard. Thank you. How are you making connections and making things happen during quarantine?
I think that one thing that I started doing right away was I started realizing, like, as a Black person, it is in my nature, it is in my culture to be community minded. And I really leaned into this at this time. In the beginning of quarantine, I remember immediately thinking, everyone was saying self-care, self-care, self-care. And to me, I was thinking, what honors who I am and my history and my culture is community care. And really, I started diving into that, looking at where I can check in on people, making connections, and not taking for granted any person of color in this, knowing that we were all probably extra stressed, extra vulnerable. We started a fundraiser because I had no work when this started. Before May, I had all my talks were canceled. So my manager had nothing to do, and I was concerned about how this was going to hit the arts community, especially for artists of color. So we started a fundraiser, but also just start DMing other people. I would say this is the time to lean into collective nature and healing. This is a time to be really, really open. And I've been saying more now than ever before, I need to talk to other people of color. I need to talk with other Black people. I need that connection. I need to know that I'm helping and serving my community. And that's really gotten me through. And what I have found is that every bit of that I put out in there, I've gotten back tenfold. Absolutely. I think I know now more who is my community and who really has my back than I ever did by just putting a little bit out there and reaching out and saying, how can I help you? And finding out that the help I didn't even know I needed was going to come back to me. So this is really the time for us to kind of let go of these really heavily Americanized ideas that we get through these things on our own. This is the time to just say, hey, I need community. I need to set up a Zoom call. I need to talk to someone. It's time to start brushing up our telephone skills again instead of just, texting and DMing everything. And it's time to start asking who needs help, who needs an ear, and really building those relationships. And it takes a little effort, but I would say, even though I haven't had a chance to sit face to face with a lot of other people, we're really taking this quarantine very seriously. I feel much closer to a lot of people in my community than I ever did. And I'm grateful for that lesson. I wish this isn't what it took, but I am grateful for that.
Well, and another thing that's on a good question with schools opening, this question is from Talina Morel, who says, we are elementary teachers. Do you have any advice for us to have these difficult conversations with students?
Yeah, a couple of things I would say. First and foremost, know what your plan is and why you want to have these conversations and what you want students to get out of them and what you want to get out of them. A lot of times people forget that when you're having these conversations with students, it's not just about what they will learn, it's about what you will learn. So no, like, yeah, I'm here to learn, I'm here to talk. I want my white students to feel this. I want my students of color to feel this and come out with this. Work out that plan, figure out what the benefit is to that conversation, and then make sure that you are making as many interested parties aware of what that conversation is and what that plan will be. What I have seen time and time again, part of the reason why I find that teachers are so afraid of engaging in these conversations is they see what happens when something goes wrong in the conversation and the teacher is kind of thrown under the bus, right? The moment a parent complains or a student's upset, and then suddenly no one in the school has heard of this and it needs to stop. Run your plans by your superiors. Get it in emails, get it written down. Make sure that parents know that this is part of your focus. It will not guarantee that there won't be pushback, but it will guarantee that you will have some of the support you need to navigate any issues that arise. And then I would say, always be sure that when you're having conversations about race, that you are doing so in a way that really affirms the safety and dignity of your students of color. A lot of times teachers really try to have these conversations on the backs of students of color, try to get them to be vulnerable and share harmful experiences in front of their peers that can really make them targets. And what you really want to do is find out what they want, how they want these conversations. Start just simple acknowledgements of who they are. A lot of times teachers jump in the conversations of race, but the students have never heard them say the word Black before, like they've never heard them actually acknowledge the race of anyone, even in books before. Start with first acknowledging the world around you. Students will feel seen by that. And then start figuring out what they want to talk about, what they want to know. Always start with ground rules. Always make sure that students know what is and is not appropriate. And always get feedback from students of color as to what they want to hear and whether or not they even want to participate in the conversation. Because they don't really get to choose when issues of race hit them. Give them the respect of letting them choose how this conversation goes.
Such an important conversation to have. The next question from Gage Martin. Thank you so much for sharing your writing abilities with the world. You talk a lot about some very vulnerable topics in your book. What was the most difficult topic to write about?
The most difficult topic to write about was absolutely my brother's experience in school. That's a chapter that I remember when I'm stressed, I get very tired. Like I get like kind of that like this overwhelming exhaustion like comes over me and I need to like lay down right away. And I remember writing the first half of that chapter and going to bed at like 4 p.m. Like I was just done. It had taken so much out of me. And then I tried to read it before the book came out at a reading and I couldn't get through it. Like my throat just closed up. And I have never read that chapter in public since. I don't even think I've gone back and looked at it since. I think that I've processed a lot of things that have happened to me, but in no way had I like processed what happened to the people I love, and when you write articles that are really personal, a lot of times you get to pick and choose and say, okay, I've made peace with this. But when I was looking at the book and trying to pick anecdotes that matched, I couldn't throw something away just because I hadn't made peace with that. And that was definitely one of those chapters where I in no way had made peace with it, had not revisited that time, but I knew it was really the only story that fit. And I wrote it and I still have not gone back to make peace with it at all. I'm just gonna kind of let it stay there in the book.
Yeah, that's such a heartbreaking story. I can understand how you feel like that. So one question that it seems to be a common concern, and I think a lot of people think about is, this is from Colleen. What's the most productive way to respond when someone says all lives matter?
Here's the thing. In 2020, there is no way anyone is saying that with any good intent. There's just not. We've had this conversation now. I mean, Black Lives Matter was a phrase that we started hearing publicly in 2014. So we are 6 years into this. It is now a weapon that is being used to counter the racist fear that people have when they are suddenly not the primary focus of social issues. And so I would say at this point, don't counter it. Show that Black Lives Matter by refusing to engage in people who want to distract you and pull you away from what you're talking about. And so when people come up to me and say, all lives matter, say, you know what, right now I'm talking about Black lives, and I keep about my work, and I focus on the people who aren't trying to stop me from doing what I'm doing. These are really distraction techniques at this day and age. No one can claim ignorance as to what they are doing when they say that. No one can claim that they don't know what is happening to Black people. No one can claim that they don't know what the impact of that phrase has on Black people and the struggle for Black lives. So when we have a large amount of people who actually believe Black Lives Matter, but maybe need to talk about strategies and what to do and where we can start changing the system, that's really where I want people to be focused, instead of people who are at this point deliberately trying to divert conversations.
Here's another question from Carrie Ann. What is one thing a non-Black person could do each day to be more aware of the need for change?
You know, one thing that I like to have people do sometimes when I'm leading workshops is to write down, the day before, write down everything they did. What they listened to when they woke up. Did you look at your phone? Did you read the news? What did you have for breakfast? Who did you, meet with? Where did you buy gas? Where did you go out for lunch? What did you buy? What did you watch? And then I want you to look at the racial aspect of all of it. Look at who is providing you with your news when you look at your phone. Look at who profits from that station. Look at who makes the most profit from your phone itself, and maybe who is exploited. Look at, who owns the diner that you ate at. Look at who made your clothing and who profits from it, right? Look at who your bosses are, who you had meetings with, who you watched on television, and look at how much of it is white. And start realizing how often in these areas where you do have some agency, you are choosing to remain in whiteness. And this is something that, regardless of your race or ethnicity, I think is often a shocking thing to realize. That, I'm getting all of my news from whiteness. I'm getting all of my entertainment from whiteness. I'm spending 90% of my money in whiteness. I am listening to white representatives, and I am, setting goals with other white people. I am sending my children to white schools with white teachers, right? We are, I am looking at white models in my magazines, and start thinking, where can I diversify this? Where do I have agency here? Let me pick one new thing each day where I move it away from white supremacy and move it towards diversity and equity and representation. And so pick one, and share it and tell people, like, hey, did you know, so one thing I started doing, looking at, I love beauty. And this may not seem like a huge thing, but I love makeup, skincare, jewelry. And I started paying attention to, like, okay, where am I buying these things? And so now when I post something, if it is a Black owned brand or a person of color owned brand, I post that. And I just say, like, but sometimes when I look at everything I did for the day, I'm like, oh, damn it. Nothing today. Nothing I am wearing today was made by a person of color. How, with all of the things I have going on here, how can that happen, right? And I realize I have to make better choices. But when I do find new resources, I share that information, and other people make new, better decisions as well. And so start looking at that and start finding those things. And there are places that may seem more important than others, right? Looking at how many teachers in your child's school are white. It may seem more important than looking at where you're buying your breakfast. But the truth is that there is a family of color who owns a restaurant that is depending on your patronage, right? And they matter as well. So all of these things matter. And look where you can start breaking that up and make meaningful impact with your dollars, with your representation, with your engagement, with your education, to make sure that you're not just looking at this, one narrow view.
Here's another question from an anonymous attendee. My most impactful sentence in the book for me was about feeling that there was so much air when being at the weekend camp. I could understand that feeling. Can you speak to more of what it feels like or felt like the rest of the time?
I think that a lot of, that chapter is me really talking about when, I growing up in a majority white area, majority white school, constantly feeling like you don't fit, like you're less than, but you don't realize how much of that, how much of yourself you are minimizing or cutting away in order to get by until you're in a space where you don't have to do that anymore. And I think that's really a defense mechanism that many people of color have, where if we really felt all of the ways in which we had to kind of cut ourselves down to fit into these shapes, it would destroy us. It would be completely soul crushing. But then sometimes you realize, just by the extreme lack of it, when suddenly you're in a space where you're like, all of me fits, all of me can be here. It can be kind of devastating. And that was one of those experiences for me where I could feel my lungs expand. And then I was aware of how narrow my breaths had been before. And I would say that in a way, it almost kind of mirrors when I started writing, because once I started writing and I had this space where I was talking really openly about my experiences, to then go into a workspace where I spent most of my time and quiet myself down again, became unbearable, and I couldn't do it. And I think it's really important that we recognize how much we are doing as people of color, as BIPOC people in this society, while also living half a life. Like, I often think, what could we accomplish if we didn't have to also worry about our accents, about our laughter, about being too aggressive or seeming too meek, or, worried about if our hair is acceptable, or if we seem educated enough, or if we have to talk in a whole different speech pattern to fit into this space. What could we do if we could let all of that go and still be seen as whole people, as valid people? And we deserve that. And now I would say, as a writer, I have been for all of the hardships that come with doing this work, because it is really difficult to document violent white supremacy day in and day out for years. It is incredibly traumatizing. I can say I have absolutely traumatized myself with my work. But at the same time, I wake up every day knowing that I get to talk openly and act openly as a Black woman. Like, I don't have to ever minimize myself. And that freedom is something I don't think I could ever back away from. And it's just something I really want for everyone, no matter what you do for a living. I want everyone to feel like they are valid just because they exist.
On that note, this is from an anonymous attendee. You wrote about the power of words. What do you advise for those of us who are writers? How can we help the cause of dismantling the systems of racism?
Part of what I would say is, I started as an opinion writer, right? So I would write opinion columns, commentary. And so oftentimes that's what I would teach when I would teach writing as well. And part of what I would always say for people, if you're trying to take people along a journey towards anti-racism, that you actually take them on an honest and authentic journey. So if you are a person of color, take them on a journey with you, right? If you are a white person who is trying to to convince your white peers, don't start with, hey, we all know this needs to be changed, and we all know that act like you've always known. I used to do this writing exercise with students where we would take an issue that seemed kind of benign, but something that everyone had a really strong opinion about. So I would usually say the Kardashians. That was my absolute favorite because everyone has an opinion on the Kardashians, but it's not life or death, right? So I would say the Kardashians, what are your opinions on the Kardashians? And I could fill whole whiteboards with people's opinions on the Kardashians. Very strong, very wild opinions on the Kardashians. And after like 10 minutes of people shouting out all the various things they think about them, I would say, okay, there was a time in your life where you had no idea who they were. And now you have these very strong opinions. How did you get there? How did you get from, I don't know these people, to I think they're the worst thing to ever happen to feminism, or I think that they're, absolutely amazing goddesses, right? How did you get from here to there? What was the path? And if you were to take me there, do you really think if I am someone who has never heard of them, I can immediately go to what's on this whiteboard? It would make no sense to me. Why do we feel anything about this random family that lives in a whole nother region of the country? You have to find a spot on the journey where you think I am and take me with you. And I think that when it comes to writing about issues of race, we do have to find a spot on the journey. You figure out who your audience is, where you think they are on the journey, and remember to where you were on that space or when someone you care about was in that space and take them on that path. A lot of times people write acting like they had always thought what they thought. They had always had all of the answers. And that sort of dishonest bragging alienates people and makes them feel like wherever they are in their journey isn't valid. And it doesn't mean you can't be angry. I walk around angry all of the time at the reality of where people are. And I think I have every right to be. I still, if I want them to move somewhere, I have to take them on a journey with me. I have to find out, okay, maybe people at this stage, I'm not even going to mess with right now. But maybe people who are here, I can move forward. But that means I have to, humble myself, take myself back to maybe when I was here and recognize that maybe everyone was here at some point and pull forward. And so that's really the advice I would give.
Here's another question from an anonymous attendee. I work for an organization that works through an equity lens. When providing space to acknowledge racial disparities in education and watching as people refuse to engage or acknowledge race, this can be frustrating. What advice do you have when facilitating these conversations?
I am of multiple minds of this, right? So DEI work can be incredibly frustrating. And I think that as a Black person who worked in corporate spaces, I saw the lack of progress that DEI work often made. There are a couple of things I would say, especially around education, that have always shocked me. One is that educators, it makes sense in a way it probably shouldn't shock me, really believe that if you just have enough information out, that everyone will move along and eventually see things the way you do. And teachers really love to think that, if I just gave enough talks, without understanding that some people are just invested in things remaining the way they are. I like to call them the flat earthers of race theory, right? They don't want to believe it. They're not going to believe it. In 2020, they believe the earth is flat. And if it is not because no one has told them it's round, and it's not because they can't look outside and see that it's round, it's because they want to. So then what? Then you have to look at ways to minimize the harm that they can cause. You have to really start talking about policies, procedures, right? You have to start talking about goals that everyone has to participate in. And so find the people you have common ground with. And if you have trouble getting people to understand the whole impact, make sure that you know the statistics and how students of color are faring in your schools. Find out what parents of color are feeling about the education that their students are receiving, right? Get that. And then lay it out. A lot of times I like to tell teachers, okay, we have two options for these numbers. Either our students of color are failing, or we are failing them. And as people dedicated to loving and believing in students, you should not be an educator if you believe that they're the ones failing. So if we are going to assume that we are failing them, then we're going to search for solutions. And we're going to look at this systematically. But I find that oftentimes educators really don't want to. They don't want to have those things written in stone. It has to all kind of live in convincing and feeling. But the truth is that you need to set a goal, and you need to talk about setting a goal that is tied to real outcomes for students and say, this is a problem that needs to be fixed and we're going to move forward and fix it, and then work towards it. And the people who maybe don't agree with it or don't want to see that it's about race are still going to have objectives they need to meet and have them work towards it. And if you find that people who are decision makers are kind of getting in the way of that, then make sure that you are empowering the people in these discussions that people need to hear from to kind of balance that out. So empower parents. A lot of times people don't even think to empower parents of color, to get parents of color in a room together, to start talking about their shared experience, to recognize that they have as much right to be heard as many white parents are, right? Empower them, use them for backup, and deputize white educators who agree with you to tell them what you need to have support in this. And then really start working towards measurable goals. Say, you know what, this is the metric we're gonna tackle. And we're gonna tackle it with the knowledge and with the, you know, verbalized needs of students and families of color, and work towards it, work out processes, check back in. And the people who want to say it's not about race, you will prove them wrong eventually when the improvement comes. But you put the policies in, you put the plan in place so that they still have to do the things instead of spending forever trying to convince them.
Here's a question from Laura. What advice do you have for a white mother raising a young Black son in a small town with a very small Black community? You wrote about your own struggles to connect and discuss race with your own white mother, and it's a common issue I hear from Black children and adults who grew up with white parents.
I would say, you know, one thing where I feel very lucky. You know, I wrote a whole chapter, has conversations with my mom. My mom and I still have a lot of conversation, but one thing where I am lucky is that she always made sure that we knew we were Black and that we knew that that was a great thing. And she always really, really struggled to get us in rooms with other Black people to really, you know, and I would say where we grew up, the suburb we grew up in, there weren't a lot of Black people at all. It was a very small Black community. And so my mom took it upon herself. It was a real important part of her feeling like she had, you know, raised us with what we needed to make friends. And so she would just reach out to Black people in the neighborhood and be like, look, you don't know me, I got Black kids. And I need my Black kids to hang out with Black people. Can we be friends? What can I do for you? You know, how can we be in community together? She built those relationships, and I need to see her have those relationships to know that she saw me and accepted me. And a lot of white parents don't do that. A lot of white parents bring Black children into their white neighborhoods, and the children become interlopers instead of reshaping their world as adults to reflect their household. And you need to reshape your world. So that means that you need to be actively trying to set up play dates. You need to be making friends yourself who are Black, you know, and you need to be educating and taking kids. My mom would take me any film with a Black person, she would take me, you know, I remember standing in line to vote for Jesse Jackson as a small child because my mom wanted to make sure that I knew, like, you know, that I was a part of voting for a Black person for president. And so even with all of my mom's shortcomings, and there will always be difficulties, I never felt like I had to not be Black around her. And when I can tell you this matters. I can tell you this matters because when I talk about this issue in front of groups of people, I have never been able to talk about it without seeing a mixed race Black person, a grown adult, break down in tears. Talk, you know, reliving their own pain of not feeling fully seen by the people who are supposed to love them the most. And so make sure that your life, your household, that you are making your community reflect what you love about the Blackness of your children in every way possible. That is a part of your duty as a parent.
Here's a question from Mavia Sorensen. Thank you so much for your willingness to meet with us and for your patience and vulnerability. I've been having some difficult conversations with family and friends about race in the past few months, as many have. I found it difficult to know what to say when people use videos of Black people saying that racism doesn't exist to justify their own racism. Any suggestions?
You know, I would say a couple of things. One, if I was going down the street punching people and people started crying because it hurt, and then someone said, no, I love it, it doesn't hurt, I wouldn't go around still punching people, right? Like I wouldn't say, oh, it doesn't hurt this person, therefore it must not hurt anyone else. Respect people, respect individuals. And yeah, sure, you may have one person who is willing to be that person to say this doesn't bother me, but don't the individuals who are harmed count? And that's why I say, like, either you believe in people and you believe that people have the right to not be harmed, or you don't. And you shouldn't use someone saying this doesn't hurt me to justify the continued harm to someone else. And so we just have to. I don't want to be someone who keeps hurting someone because someone else said that they don't mind. I'm going to, first and foremost, try to avoid harm. And, you know, I think I said once, a lot of times it's like trying to tell someone what they ate for breakfast. You weren't there, you don't know. And someone else coming up and saying, I ate something else, you don't get to turn around and say, see, this is what they ate, it must be what you ate too. We have to respect people's ability to say what is happening to them, to interpret what is happening in their world, and recognize that we are all diverse people. But just like, you know, something hurts you and it may not hurt someone else, it doesn't mean that you keep doing this thing that has been documented to hurt. So just, I constantly try to get people to understand, like, one of the fundamental underpinnings of racism is the denial of the humanity and dignity of people of color. And part of that lies in saying that people of color don't have the right to say what is happening to them, that they don't have the ability to talk about what is happening to them, and that their own personal safety and well-being doesn't matter. Every single life matters, right? Fundamentally, and that's why we say Black Lives Matter, because we haven't been treated as such. And if you believe that Black Lives Matter, then you believe each Black person who says they're being harmed, and you say, what can I do to reduce the harm? And that's really where I say, are you someone who likes to hurt people, or are you someone who doesn't? And if someone is saying it hurts them, believe them and try to reduce the harm.
Here's a question from a young viewer named Hillary. She says, from a 15-year-old mixed race girl watching on my mom's account from Beacon Hill, you talk about community. I feel here in Wenatchee, I have no community. I'm alone with even my closet friends making microaggressive comments. How do I find my community until I can go back to the city? You know, it can be really tough when you're young. And I remember a teacher telling me, because I remember at that age feeling so isolated, saying, you know, the world gets bigger and bigger and you absolutely will find people. I wish I had had the internet at that time, honestly. And so one thing I would say is, whatever your interests are, there are people out there, maybe even if they're not local, who absolutely have those interests. Seek them out. And believe it or not, there will be a group of like nerds of color, if you're a nerd, you know, comic book fans of color, whatever it is that you're into. I've been in those groups and have found them, seek them out, like do a Facebook search and find them and sit in those spaces. It will help normalize the way things should be. And then I would also say, it is perfectly okay to state how you want your friendships to be. And I wish I had learned that. I wish I had learned that I could say to my friends, being my friend means not making these jokes anymore. And it has this impact on me. And I want to have a friendship where I don't, you know, this is what I end up having to do, and I don't want to have to do that. And it isn't always taken well. It isn't. But I have found that some people adjust, and they do, and then your friendship is stronger. It doesn't mean it's perfect. But also anyone else who comes into your life knows that. And once you get used to saying that and starting your relationships with that, then it becomes something you actually end up having to kind of reckon with far less, because people know immediately what they're getting into in their friendships with you. But you have the right to just exist and not have to deal with that. I was just talking to my partner about this the other day, because he grew up in the South End, majority Black neighborhood, and I grew up in the North End, majority white neighborhood. And it never occurred to him that you would have to spend your entire youth laughing off racist jokes, you know, being kind of the punchline, being where your difference is consistently, you know, commented on over and over and over again.
And he was shocked to learn that that was my life as well. Like, yeah, absolutely, I had to do that. But when I realized I didn't, and when I started really reframing my friendships, my circle was a lot smaller, but I could trust a little more. And I could know even when things were messed up that people were willing to work through it with me because they were already there when I said this doesn't work. But in the meantime, you have to have something that reminds you of the way things should be. So absolutely start looking online, finding other groups of people. And you may find a couple of things. One, you may find other local people who really do feel the same way that maybe you had no idea. But you'll also just have a space where you can say, hey, is this okay? Like, have I lost it? Or is this not cool? What's happening with me and my friends? And have someone to at least remind you that you're not crazy. And then just hang in there because your circle will get larger. It will grow. And the more that you can protect what is authentic about you, the happier you will be when you get into that space.
Here's another question. I was so struck by your story about your young son that so sadly he couldn't safely play in the yard with a toy gun while his white stepbrother could. How have your children been involved in these recent discussions? Are they glad you're out there talking about race?
My older son, well, I mean, okay, so they're kids, right? So my oldest son is 18. He just went off to college. And I would say he did that whole teenage kind of rebellion thing, or he didn't want to talk with me about these things. And I had to find out through the grapevine where maybe I have influenced him. I will be on Facebook and see him having a debate about race and be like, oh, okay. He's learned some, he knows his stuff, right? In a way that makes me proud. But, of course, he would never, let mom know directly that he's at all interested in anything I'm interested in, because this is my job as well, right? In some ways, it's been tough, especially for my younger son, because this does put our safety at risk. The work I do has put our family at risk. And, we had some really scary events last year. We had to move. And I do think my 12-year-old was really, really traumatized by it. And so he firmly believes, that Black Lives Matter. He firmly believes in equity. I also think he's really desperate for a space where maybe this work isn't controlling so much of his life. And I'm definitely trying to find that balance for him. This last year has been really tough, but he's still watching really closely the protests. He's still asking me a ton of questions about politics. He's still asking why, and he's still forming his own opinions, and he's going to be 13 soon, getting really ready to argue with me a lot. But I also think he really wants a little more of a bubble around him that many, that kids need to feel safe. And that was kind of burst last year, and we're working on rebuilding it. So I would say right now, I don't think my younger son absolutely loves that this is what I do. My 18-year-old gets it, and I think he is really proud. And I think that if I can continue to rebuild some of that safety, I'll never be able to fully rebuild it. I don't think, because my 12-year-old's a fighter as well, right? He's constantly picking battles at school of things that he thinks are racist, and moving forward, it's just, I think he would love to also have a space where he can just be 12 and these things aren't impacting him. And I hope to give him that one day.
Well, as we're drawing to an end, I'll take one more question, and that is, and then we'll wrap it up. What is the topic of your next book?
My next book is comes out in December, and it is a history of the formation of white male identity in America. And it's a particular white male identity around, power and aggression, and talking kind of about how we pay as a society, people of all races, all genders, when we say that leadership looks like overpowering others, that aggression and violence are how you move forward, what that means, and is there a way that we can move away from that to something more equitable, something more community focused, something healthier before it's too late. So it is a book about race fundamentally and a book about gender, but it is absolutely a different tone. It's much more of a history. It's about 200 years of selected history. And I am proud of it, and I am excited for it to be out in the world this winter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Ijeoma, thank you so much for joining us today. We have so appreciated your time. Remember, Ijeoma's book, So You Want to Talk About Race, is available digitally through both our Overdrive and Hoopla collections. Check it out at ncrl.org. Also, you can pick up copies of her book at our regional local bookstores, including a book for all seasons in Leavenworth and a Tales End bookstore in Winthrop, Washington. This evening's program is part of our NCRL Virtual Reads author series. Join us next Tuesday, August 25th at 4 p.m. for Jason Reynolds, best-selling and award-winning author of Stamped, Anti-Racism, Racism, and You, co-written with Ibram X. Kendi. Jason has also written many award-winning and best-selling books for young adults, including Long Way Down, Miles Morales, and others. Ijeoma, thank you again, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Have a great evening.